Hello, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar about Tier 1 reading instruction. This is our first webinar in a series of 3 that will focus on reading instruction within a multi-tiered system of support. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Tier 1 instruction specifically, and we really appreciate your taking the time to be with us. We also appreciate the hosts of today's webinar, Pivot Learning, Core, and Keyphonics. Pivot and Core partner with education leaders to ensure all students reach their full potential through the use of high-quality curriculum, evidence-based instruction, and equitable supports. And Keyphonics offers a comprehensive diagnostic phonics screener, and we're going to share a little bit more about all 3 organizations a little bit later on. I'm Emily Sumner, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. I'm here to help everything run smoothly for you. So before we begin, I'm going to review just a few quick tips. You're welcome to ask questions throughout the webinar, and we encourage that. We are going to save some time at the end for a Q&A. To send a question in, use the questions feature in your control panel. Just type your question into the top box, click send, and I'll receive that question and put it into the queue to be answered during the Q&A. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can use that same questions feature to get my attention, and I'll do my best to resolve the problem for you. One thing you can do right now to make things run smoothly is to just close all of the other applications on your computer, as well as all of your other internet browser tabs. If you just leave GoToWebinar open, that really helps all of your internet and computer bandwidth go to power this and can smooth out audio and video lags. If you do have blips in your connection that last more than a second or two, you can close out of GoToWebinar, come right back in, and that usually smooths things out. We will be sharing a recording of the webinar along with a lot of resources and the slide deck and a certificate of attendance. We'll be sending that by email tomorrow, so keep an eye on your inbox for how to access all of those great materials. All right, I am very pleased to introduce our presenters, who are Dr. Carrie Thomas-Beck, Dr. Michelle Hosp, and Dr. Monica Ng. Carrie is Director of Literacy at CORE, and prior to joining the CORE team, she was the dyslexia specialist for the Oregon Department of Education. Michelle is currently Scientific Advisor for Keyphonics, and she is the author of the best-selling book, The ABCs of CBM, A Practical Guide to Curriculum-Based Measurement. And Monica is Vice President, Education Programs with Pivot Learning, and before joining Pivot, Monica served as a professional development provider for a statewide response to intervention project, during which she closely worked with 14 schools in New York City to design and implement their school's RTI framework over a period of 3 years. So we're going to be hearing from all 3 of our presenters. They all have a lot to share, but let's just take a quick look at what is on our agenda today. First, we're going to be reviewing the importance of assessing high priority phonemic awareness and phonics skills. We'll then take a look at how to use foundational skills data to plan Tier 1 instruction, and then we'll wrap up by discussing how to use assessment data to ensure responsive and inclusive reading instruction. So Dr. Carrie Thomas-Beck is going to get us started. And there she is. Welcome, Carrie.
Thanks, Emily. So I'm going to get us started on our first objective today, and that is to discuss the importance of assessment. So to set the stage for that topic, I wanted to start with Scarborough's rope. I know it's an image that many of you are familiar with. So Scarborough's rope is really a visual representation of how one arrives over time at skilled reading. And Scarborough's rope helps us think about all of the skills students need to become skilled readers. And then likewise, it informs us which skills we should assess as well as teach. So reading comprehension is the ultimate goal of reading instruction, and it's achieved as the result of mastering each of the strands that form this reading rope. These individual strands are organized under 2 large areas, one being language comprehension and the second word recognition. So today, we're going to focus on 2 strands under the word recognition section. Specifically, we'll look at phonological awareness and decoding. These skills are foundational skills that are critical in helping all students achieve success in reading. There are many assessments that focus on these skills, as well as instructional techniques for teaching them. Okay, so We want to be sure we know which skills within these two strands provide us with the greatest chance of students being successful readers. We consider these to be the high priority skills. So what do we mean by high priority skills? Specifically, we mean those skills that are linked to reading outcomes, that have a high correlation with reading outcomes. Those skills that are easily assessed, those skills that can be taught. In the case of decoding, those skills that represent the most common sounds and word patterns. And finally, we want to focus on those skills that are necessary for learning the more complex skills. So for example, while Scarborough's rope lists phonological awareness as a strand, today we're going to focus on a high priority skill within phonological awareness, which is phonemic awareness. And phonemic awareness is the ability to identify and manipulate the individual sounds in spoken words. So this table provides a list of phonemic awareness skills organized from easiest to more complex, then an example of each skill, and finally the approximate grade we expect the skills to be mastered by. Many phonemic awareness assessments will address one or more of these skills included in the table. Depending on the student's grade, you should prioritize which skills to measure as well as which skills to teach. For example, segmenting sounds in words is a critical skill that supports word reading and spelling. This skill is typically assessed in kindergarten through the beginning of grade 1. Okay. So we need to select an assessment that can help us determine who is on track and who needs more help. To help you determine which assessment is right for you, we have outlined the critical features you should look at when identifying a phonemic awareness assessment. So those features are, you want assessments that are reliable and valid, administered one-on-one, assessments that actually require the student to produce the phonemes aloud. We also want assessments that are quick and efficient to administer, so no longer than 10 minutes per student in the case of phonemic awareness. And we also want assessments that would be appropriate for students in grades K through 2. So those features in bold, those are the must-haves in any assessment that you select. And then we also have some additional features to keep in mind when selecting a phonemic awareness assessment. Those include measures that include the most common phonemic awareness skills, those that provide multiple opportunities for students to respond to each skill that you're assessing, assessments that will answer questions at the student, class, as well as at the grade level. And then finally, you'll want to look for assessments that provide you with instant reports, no delay there. So we have taken those critical features and put them into a checklist for you so that you'll have a clear guide to follow when selecting a phonemic awareness assessment. One place that we recommend that you check out for identifying phonemic awareness assessments is the National Center on Intensive Intervention. Their website includes a tool chart for selecting assessments. And that highly recommends that you go check that out if you haven't been to their website yet. So let's move on and talk about decoding. So this table lists the phonics skills from easiest to more complex. Again, an example of each skill and the approximate grade that we would expect the skills to be mastered. So many phonemic assessments will address one or more of these skills included on this table. And again, depending on the student's grade, you should prioritize which skills to measure as well as those that you will teach. Today, we'll be looking at assessments that measure more than one phonics skill. Okay. The critical features that you should focus on for selecting a phonics assessment include, again, those assessments that are reliable and valid, so really strong technical adequacy. Assessments that require students to read aloud. I have found in my experience that many of the computer-based assessments don't always include a component where the student reads aloud. They might ask the students to choose a response or read silently, but it's really critical that the assessment you select has students reading aloud. Again, you want quick and efficient assessments, so no more than 5 minutes per student when assessing phonics. And it's also really important that your phonics assessment include nonsense words. What often happens with students is they are able to fly under our radar if we only assess on regular words, because many students get really good at memorizing words and truly don't have the decoding skills needed to attack words that they've never seen or read before. So really look for assessments with nonsense words. And for phonics, we typically look for assessments that begin in grades 1 and up when we're looking at word reading. Those are your must-haves. Again, those items in the green and in the bold are must-haves for selecting a phonics assessment. And then some other considerations for you. You want to look for measures that assess the most common phonics patterns, and not only include words that are single syllable words, but also multisyllabic words. You want to choose an assessment that allows you to score at the error level so that you can actually mark which part or parts of the word the students had difficulty with. You also want to select an assessment that includes multiple opportunities for each phonics pattern that you are assessing. So not just one word, but we want 3 words, 5 words, etc. We want to make sure the student is asked to read every word on the assessment. And then ideally, you want to look for assessments that reflect the scope and sequence of your core reading program. So in other words, you want an assessment that includes the skills that represent what you are actually teaching in your classroom, because those assessments will give you the information you need to make good decisions about your Tier 1 instruction. In addition, you want assessments that answer questions, again, at the student, class, and grade level. And of course, an assessment that will provide instant reports, just like the phonemic awareness assessments. Okay, and again, we've taken the critical features for selecting a phonics assessment and put them in a checklist for you, so you'll have that clear guide to refer back to when you're selecting phonics assessments. One other place that we recommend you check out is a webinar that was conducted by Drs. Louisa Moats and Michelle Hosp that was titled Using Phonics Assessment Data to Inform Instruction. And this was a webinar presented a few months ago that was sponsored by Pivot and Core. And to get access to that webinar, you can just follow the bit.ly that's shown on the slide. And we'll also be sharing this information in a follow-up email. All right, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Michelle Hosp.
Thanks, Carrie, and thanks for all of that great information. It's great to be with you guys. I think one of the things I want to say is that it's really important, and we're really excited to be talking to you about Tier 1 reading instruction, because we know the past couple years have been wonky at best. And so it's really, really important that we get a handle on how our kids are doing, particularly on these really critical foundational skills that Carrie reviewed for us. So I'm gonna actually take the information that she shared about, so now we have an idea of what we should be assessing for phonemic awareness and phonics skills. And I'm actually gonna walk you through how to look at some data. But I'm going to apologize up front. I'm actually going to turn my camera off because I'm not sure that my internet is really stable today. We have some bad weather coming in. So I will turn it back on when we do questions and later on in the presentation, but I'm just going to turn my camera off, but I'm still here with you all. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to, again, go back and reflect on the information that Carrie shared with us. And we have just reviewed those critical skills, right, for phonemic awareness as well as phonics. So now, and she also talked about how to select the assessments. And those things are really things that are highlighted quite nicely in Scarborough's reading rope. So now we're actually going to turn our attention to how to use the data from these assessments to help inform and drive instruction for all students, meaning Tier 1. So remember, this year's data and instruction is most likely going to look different because the past couple of years have been very different. So we want to really lean in and inform ourselves and make sure that we're gathering really good information so that we are focusing on the right skills and we are teaching the right foundational skills for all of our students to be successful in reading. So to do this, we want to think about answering the following 3 questions. Are phonemic awareness or phonics skills improving across the year for a grade and class? Are students demonstrating basic competency of phonemic awareness skills and mastery of phonics skills that they have been taught? And the last question is, so which phonemic awareness or phonics skills should be taught whole class versus small group? So information from these questions is really going to help us determine where to intervene and which skills to address. So before I move over to looking at the data, I just want to do a full disclosure. So the data I'm going to be sharing is actually from DIBELS 8 and Keyphonics. So I used to do a lot of trainings on DIBELS as well as other CBM measures, and I am the developer and scientific advisor for Keyphonics. So let's look at some of this really cool data. So we're first going to start with looking at phonemic awareness skills. So one assessment you might be familiar with is phoneme segmentation fluency, PSF, on DIBELS. This measures segmenting sounds and words, remember, which is one of our high priority skills. So this data, as well as other data that I'm going to be sharing from DIBELS, is actually provided by Amplify. And Amplify can help with data collection, reporting, and other tools, either through the DIBELS data system or MClass. The data that I'm showing for DIBELS is not real data, but it does provide you with an example of how the data might look over the last 2 years. So this data shows a box and whisker plot for PSF, looking at beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year. So I just want to orient you to these, this type of data if you're not familiar with it. So these gray boxes that we see represent the benchmark for that time of year. The white line that we see in the box indicates the median score. The top of the box indicates the 3rd quartile, and the bottom of the box represents the 1st quartile. The ends of the lines represent our highest and lowest scores for that assessment. So looking at the data, how would you answer the question? Are phonemic awareness skills improving across the year for this grade or class? Because we see the data going up and skills improving, we would actually say yes, that skills are improving. So now we're going to stick with phonemic awareness, but we're going to look at this set of data on PSF to help answer the next 2 questions. So remember, we're looking at their scores on PSF as a measure of risk. So that's going to help us determine what students may need help with. So there are 4 categories. We have blue and green, which represent core support, meaning those students are not at risk. Then there's yellow and red, which represent the need for either strategic or intensive support, meaning that those students actually are at risk or did not meet the benchmark. So to answer the first question, are students demonstrating competency of phonemic awareness skills that they have been taught? It's helpful to determine the percent of students actually who need core support versus strategic or intensive support. So this data indicates that 53% of the students in this class do not need support, but 47 do need strategic or intensive support. So that's roughly half of the students have not yet learned this skill. Remember, we said it was a high priority skill, so it's something that we really want to pay attention to. So how would you answer that question? Are students demonstrating basic competency of phonemic awareness skills they have been taught? I would actually, looking at this data, answer that question no, that they are not, because I have roughly half of my class is needing either strategic or intensive support in this skill. So now let's address the second question. That question is, which phonemic awareness skills should be taught whole class versus small group? So since phoneme segmentation fluency only measures one skill, right, that's segmenting phonemes, we should actually think about asking this question is, does segmenting phonemes need to be taught whole class? And since 47% are at risk, I would answer yes. So what we want to know next is who should be taught in small group are those students who could use additional instruction. And those are the students that I'm looking at on the screen that actually show up as red or yellow. So you can see that even by looking at the data that you may have access to, by answering some pretty thoughtful questions, it will really help you determine what should I be doing whole class versus what should I be doing in small groups. Now we're going to apply those same 3 questions to some phonics data. And remember, these questions are phonics skills improving across the year for a greater class? Are students demonstrating mastery of phonics skills they have been taught? And which phonics skills should be taught whole class versus small group? So first, similar to our DIBELS data for phoneme segmentation fluency, we can look at our box and whisker plots for nonsense word fluency. This is the measure in DIBELS that measures phonics. So to answer our first question, are phonics skills improving across the year for a grade or class? We can see, looking at our data, that actually it is going up. So we could answer this question with a yes. Now, sticking with our same nonsense word fluency from DIBELS, we're going to look at students' scores. Remember, these scores are a measure of risk to help us determine what students may need help with. Because this measure is not a mastery measure, we need to frame that first question more as, are students demonstrating basic competency of phonics skills they have been taught? Because we're looking at a risk category and we're not making a clear designation with a DIBELS assessment for mastery versus non-mastery. So similar to how we looked at phoneme segmentation fluency, let's break the class into 2 groups. First, let's break the class into those students who do not need support. Remember, those are our blue and green. And those students who do need support. Those are our red and yellow. So we can see that 20% don't need support, but that means that 80% of our kids still need either strategic or intensive support in phonics. So the majority of our class has not yet learned phonics. So how would you answer that question? Are students demonstrating basic competency of the phonics skills they have been taught? Well, based on the majority of our class not hitting benchmark, we would say that no, that our students are not demonstrating basic competency. So now let's focus on that second question. Which phonics skills should be taught whole class versus small group? Now remember, nonsense word fluency wasn't designed to actually tell us specifically which phonics skills a student needs help with. So we really need to look at the data relative to the type of phonics skills that are included. So on DIBELS 8 nonsense word fluency, they include skills like CVC words, CVCE, R controlled, etc. And these are all high priority skills. So we should be asking, does phonics need to be taught whole class? Now remember, since 80% of our students are at risk, I would say yes, we need to continue to teach phonics whole class. So who should be taught in a small group? I would say those students who are most at risk. So those students who are red are those students who should also receive phonics instruction in small groups as they need additional support to learn phonics. Now we're going to ask those same 3 questions, but this time we're going to look at it through the lens of Keyphonics. So this assessment specifically was designed to allow you to screen students on 12 separate phonics patterns for grades 1 and up. So just to orient you to this chart, at the bottom, you can see the patterns listed, and these include contractions, CVC, CVC-CC, CVC, oh my gosh, I'm getting all mixed up with my CVCs. CVCC, CVCE, there's digraphs, blends, R controlled, up to more multisyllabic patterns. And remember, those are all those high priority skills that Carrie talked about. So we'll also see 3 data points that represent the beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year. So this bar graph shows how a grade or class performed on each of these 12 phonics patterns across the entire school year. So how would you answer the question? Are phonics skills improving across the year for a grade or class? Since we see clearly an increase in these 12 skills, we would answer yes, phonics skills are improving across the year for this grade or class. Now I want to take us and drill down a little bit further. So now we're going to look at the class matrix report from Keyphonics, and this is going to help us answer those next 2 questions. So remember, the first question is, are students demonstrating mastery of the phonics skills they have been taught? So with Keyphonics, you have the ability to customize that scope and sequence of your skills. So this is going to help you answer this question. So we're going to ignore those skills that fall under being taught, meaning that students are probably currently receiving instruction on these skills, and not taught, meaning these are skills that students have not yet received instruction on. So we can look at these, this array of 12 phonics skills, and we can focus on those skills that we have taught all of our students. When we say taught, that really means that we have left the instruction. We have delivered the instruction, and we are now teaching other skills. So it's really important that those skills under taught, all of our students have mastered. So if we focus only on those skills under taught, we would expect all of our students, right, to be doing really well because we've already provided them lots of instruction on it. And remember, those are those high priority skills. So if at least 60% of the class has mastered these skills, the box at the top up here is going to be green. If the box is red, it actually means that not enough students are mastering those skills. So how would you answer the question? Are students demonstrating mastery of the phonics skills that they have been taught? Well, for this, I would say yes for contractions and CVC and blends and CVCC. But I would actually answer no for those skills like digraphs, CVCE, and that more complex pattern like CVC, CVC. Those are words like catnip or rabbit. That's where we start getting into those multisyllabic patterns. So I would say yes for some skills, but no for others. That's really helpful for me when I'm thinking about instruction. So now let's look at that. Let's answer that second question. Which phonics skills should be taught whole class versus small group? So for those skills that fewer than 60% have reached mastery, remember those are going to be in red. it makes sense as a teacher to teach those skills whole class because we have too many students who have not yet achieved mastery. So in order to be efficient, it makes sense to deliver our instruction at a tier 1 whole class setting. So to answer the first part of the question, which phonics skills should be taught whole class? I would say digraph, CVCE, and CVC, CVC. Now let's answer the second part of that question. So then which phonics skills should be taught small group? Because Keyphonics Data lists each student and provides data for each of those phonics categories, we can really focus on those students at the bottom who need the greatest assistance and think about how can we support their phonics skills in tier 1 instruction when we're delivering instruction whole class and with our differentiated groups. Because this data is going to give us an idea of how much support those students are going to need, both in a whole class setting and in small groups. So to wrap this up and move on to the really exciting part, which is where we're going to be talking about instruction, I want to make just another point. When we look at our data, we really need to be thinking about two big pieces of information. We want to be able to have really clear data on those critical skills, and we're talking about phonemic awareness and phonics today. And we want to be able to ask, how big is the problem? Meaning, how many of our kids have this skill? How many of our kids still need support learning this skill? So we want to be able to understand, is the problem grade wide, right? Are we dealing with so many kids across our entire grade that we should be really problem solving at that level? Is it happening in a classroom or is it happening with a small group of students? So first we want to look at that data and say, how big is that problem? And then we want to be able to drill down and say, so which skills need to be taught or retaught, right? We want to really focus on those high priority skills because those are the ones that are going to give us the best bang for our buck. And those are the skills that we want to be thinking about. Is it something that should be addressed for all kids in this grade? Are we looking at a classroom or are we looking at a small group? So I'm really excited about the information that Monica is going to share with us because she's now going to talk to us about how are we going to solve the problem, right? We know our data is going to look wonky and Monica is going to give us some great tips for what do we do about that.
Thanks, Michelle. I just want to acknowledge that it's an extraordinary time to be an educator right now. And that if you are part of a school, classroom, district that is taking on this idea of learning recovery or learning acceleration, the worries and concerns can feel huge. And so one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we structured our webinar in the way that we did today is it is so helpful to know what are the high priority skills and how do we measure those? And again, because our goal here is always how can we address these issues as effectively, efficiently, and quickly as possible. So not allow students to founder and struggle for longer than they need to when we can and should be addressing these high priority skills very quickly. And so that really with the goal of moving on, we really want to use this time and use this incredible data that Michelle showed us to prevent long-term reading difficulties. So we do not want to linger on these high priority skills. We just need to know that students have them because all of the evidence and all of the science shows that without these skills, students are much more likely to become have long-term reading difficulties. And so again, we want to get students to that grade level text. We want them to be reading with comprehension and doing the writing and analysis of those grade level texts that we know is the reason why we read. And so again, the idea is because we can measure these quickly and efficiently, because we can teach to them and remove the barrier from students, we want to be able to do that. And again, get a sense of the scope of the problem as quickly as possible. Because if you're in a school or a system where these high priority skills are not an issue, great. move on and continue focusing on the skills, the grade level skills around comprehension and really reading those grade level texts. So whenever we talk about reading and reading instruction, I always want to start at the systems level, because the way that I think about it is that learning recovery and learning acceleration have to be designed at the systems level. And what we want to do is we want to remove the barriers that we may have in place that are preventing the effective classroom teaching that we need. And so there's when the issue, because our data shows that it's an entire grade needs help with a skill, our approaches to addressing that are going to look different than if it's just a few students or a classroom. And so I want to address the systems level because I think it's really critical. And as a former classroom teacher myself, I didn't have the autonomy, for example, to choose which curriculum I used. I chose what our school had adopted. And so again, we want to try to remove the barriers that are preventing the great instructional practices that are going to lead our kids to mastery. And so the first thing that we want to look at is the skill actually taught in the curriculum that we have available to our teachers? And surprisingly, that's not always a foregone conclusion. Even if your curriculum is state approved or had a stamp on it that said highest quality, you want to really have the folks that understand reading in your system to look carefully to see, are these high priority skills the ones that Carrie and Michelle really outlined? Are they here in the curriculum? And if not, what can we do about that? And so in some of the systems where we've had the opportunity to work, rather than saying, okay, we're going to change adoptions from one curriculum to another, districts have thought about how can we add supplemental materials specifically for phonemic awareness and phonics. And so that is a strategy that some districts have chosen to do, because it enables them to, continue the momentum with their core curriculum while really identifying that such a large proportion of our students need additional support and really intensive and explicit work on their phonics and phonemic awareness, that we are going to add supplements to our core curriculum. And that's been an effective solution in some places. The second thing is that have the skills been taught but not learned to mastery? And I think many teachers and many curricula even teach kids, they give kids exposure. They give their students exposure to some of these ideas. But again, your data should reveal to you whether or not students have really mastered these skills. And that is really the difference. Is yes, I taught a lesson on that once, but really you should have evidence that students have really mastered these skills. There is the skill in the curriculum, but it hasn't really been taught. And so one of the examples that Michelle talks about is an entire grade level, the second grade, didn't teach the last critical phonics skills in their curriculum because they ran out of time. They simply ran out of time, and so students were never taught those skills. And Keyphonics was a tool that made that very apparent, that here's a key skill that's expected to be taught in the second grade, but almost none of the second graders have been exposed to it and therefore couldn't show mastery of those skills. So again, looking at that really carefully to identify where there might be gaps in what has actually been taught. And addressing that either at the whole grade level, the whole classroom level, or at the small group level. And then the last two are really around the skill of your instructors and whether or not when you observe lessons, you think that the teacher is engaging in the effective teaching practices that are going to enable students to really absorb and master these skills. And so again, there's opportunities to identify where teachers need additional support. And again, the systems level piece is around understanding what resources and support should we be providing to teachers so that they can be successful. All right. And as we move to the classroom level, I want to be, again, really clear about the fact that these questions are oriented so that we can determine as school leaders, as district leaders, how are we providing classroom teachers the supports and materials they need to engage in these practices. So as a professional development provider, I'm not a huge fan of just giving a bunch of responsibility to teachers and saying, figure this out. Instead, we should really be trying to think about, if teachers are going to be engaging in these kinds of strategies, how can we best support them? And so even though we're saying these are at the classroom level, many of these are creative solutions, non-traditional solutions to meeting the needs of students. And so it would be very difficult for a teacher independently to decide, this is what I'm going to do, but instead that this could be a school level, at the minimum school level plan for how these needs are going to get addressed at the classroom level. And the first thing is again, rather than say to a teacher, you need to catch students up in an entire year of instruction, to really help them focus on those high priority skills. Especially at the beginning of the school year. So where are our students with these high priority skills, and how do we then adjust our teaching to make sure that we are very explicitly and intensively addressing those so that we can quickly move on from them, I think is the idea. Make sure that kids have mastered them and move on. Can you click? Yep. And so, you know, one of the perpetual problems of any teacher is where to find that extra time. And so we've offered some suggestions of ways in which other schools and other systems have found that additional time to really make sure that these priority skills get the attention that they need. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit about some concerns that have popped up for me as I look at a couple of these suggestions. And one is the paring back of independent seat work. And for lots of students who are in hybrid learning, or even as we return now, and there's a lot of concerns about social distancing and safety, you know, my fear is that we're going to go back to sitting in individual desks with worksheets much more than probably is going to benefit students. And so again, as we think about how we can be most creative with our time, independent seat work, especially for students who have difficulties with reading, tends to be the least productive time. And so really thinking creatively about how we can pare that back. Many folks have decided to expand their ELA blocks from 90 minutes to 120 minutes. And again, that is, again, a systems level or at least a school level choice to do something like that. But again, one of the ways you can be creative about that block is really actually tip number 4, which is really around linking the spelling and the writing. So again, sometimes in elementary schools, I see those 3 things are separated out as different periods. And again, to think about how can I integrate skills across, because we know that it's so valuable for students as they're practicing and developing these skills to mastery, that it's essential that they see it, they say it, and they write it. And so again, how do we make sure that we're really thinking across periods to how we can get additional practice and support to students? The last 2, number 4 and number 6, are actually about creative use of smaller reading groups. And that is using cross classroom groups. So again, if a teacher has 2 students in her class that need additional targeted support around a specific skill area, that's not, and another teacher has 2, could you combine those 2 students into a small group of 4, really give them the targeted instruction that they need, as opposed to each teacher separately is running that same targeted skills work with only 2 students. And so trying to think creatively about, again, the block schedule can often support that because there's a time when everyone's receiving intervention or enrichment, and we can share students across classes. And so number 6 gives you this idea of being even creative with your collectives, with your electives, excuse me. So thinking about how using special periods or elective classes to creatively group students so that each teacher can be focusing on specific skills with smaller groups of students while everyone, the other students are playing kickball, and you rotate them through the periods, so that and that still preserves some planning time for teachers. And so again, because of the extraordinary circumstances we're in, maybe this is a time when your system would be more open or more willing to considering some of these different kinds of configurations of students and teachers. Again, you know, this concept of whole class versus small group is one of the critical ones that we think about within MTSS, because one of our maxims is we cannot intervene our way out of a weak core curriculum. So again, today's session is really focused on Tier 1 because we think that there is a lot of work that can be accomplished within our tier 1 instruction before we start asking for a reading specialist to take kids out of the classroom. We want to really maximize the value that students are getting out of core instruction and making sure that that core instruction is taught very, very effectively. One of the things that we look for in effective tier 1 instruction are these clear instructional routines. And so we have webinars with the instructional routine queen, Anita Archer. And so she gives some examples of explicit routines that students can engage in repeatedly, where you're just really swapping out the content. So again, it's not teaching students a new routine every day or every week, but really they're familiar routines. And by changing the content, we can maximize the time that we have for instruction and for student engagement and practice. And then again, this idea that there are these priority skills, again, are the signal to us that we need to have small group work if students are continuing to, in spite of exposure to the material, they still show that they're struggling with those. So again, that's really the concentrated use of the small group, that in small group, we're giving additional opportunities for practice. We're able to give corrective and timely feedback to students. And so that's really how you know that that is a small group need, is because you have students that need that additional practice and corrective feedback. And then there is this question of what happens if I am a teacher and it's clear from my data that students have not mastered a particular skill, but that is not part of my core curriculum, that the teaching of that skill is actually happening in earlier grades. And so one of the things that we can do is, again, thinking about the small group work or the intensive periods that you're able to offer students specific skill work. Can we share across grade levels and identify, again, this is a systems level piece, it would be wonderful if the reading specialists or the folks in charge of student services really know where those lessons are across at each grade, that you've mapped a tool like Keyphonics onto your core curriculum, so you know exactly where those lessons are. And you can share those lessons across grades so that it doesn't have to be the reading specialist that teaches that skill, that it can be part of a targeted small group effort within the classroom. And again, similar ideas of just really looking at, in a disciplined way, all of your interventions across the school and making sure that every grade is aware of what you have in the building and how it can be used. And use what you have access to before purchasing something new. And so again, we recommend folks use the National Center on Intensive Intervention to look for high quality evidence-based interventions. But again, really thinking about, before we add another program, before we add more training onto our teachers' plates, what can we use that is existing and already in our building and something that we have seen work with our students. The last idea is really around, following up on that idea of sharing materials and sharing students even across grade. And so certainly the within classroom groups, we want to make sure that those materials for addressing missing priority skills are available in the classroom and that teachers know how to use those materials. That idea of using within grade groups, we think there's potential with this. So again, it reduces the amount of planning time for teachers, because they can really focus on, I'm going to have a group today where we're really focusing on this particular priority skill while the teacher next door is focusing on another one. So again, reducing the planning and enabling students to get that maximum benefit because their small group is very targeted towards their needs. The across grade groups can be more challenging, and we need to think a little bit about how that works and what feels right for students, and to manage for things like stigma around that. But again, depending on your system, mixed grade groups may be something that happen. And so how can we again maximize not who is in the group so much as what is the priority skill being taught? So again, once you have identified that priority skill and are teaching it, then you can identify who belongs in this group or who would benefit from this particular type of group instruction. So again, we know this is an extraordinary time and it's going to require a lot of creative problem solving across systems and across classrooms. And so we're really hoping that some of these suggestions inspire you, and we always love to hear from you about whether you've tried some of these ideas and it's something that has been effective or ineffective for your school or district. So I just, by way of wrapping up, want to share that I am from Pivot Learning, and we really work with educators to ensure academic rigor and think about proactive intervention systems that are going to ensure that students have access to grade level material and are going to have great outcomes, and really thinking about how do we start from the systems level all the way down to the classroom and individual student level. And so we do have lots of supports and ideas and suggestions for how you can think about choosing those high quality instructional materials and support a really robust implementation of those materials. And then the systems that we're thinking about for recovering from missed instruction and also training educators. And again, our specific focus is on creating inclusive systems that are really addressing students' needs across the board. So positive behavior, providing those targeted academic interventions, and improving outcomes and compliance in special education. So we do think about all those things as well with district leaders.
Thanks, Monica. That was really helpful. So I want to share just a little bit about Keyphonics, and then I'm going to ask Carrie to also talk a little bit about some of the core supports. So for Keyphonics, I want to just share how you can actually get Keyphonics. You could actually have a school or district use of Keyphonics. So that is really a customized version, and you can request a quote for that. And most excited because we know it's been a really rough couple of years, and we feel for educators and we feel for families and we really feel for students who really need help with their reading skills. So coming soon, hopefully in September, we are going to be offering our classroom version actually free for the entire school year. So it's really our contribution to, helping teachers and kids kind of get back on track and really focus on really critical skills in phonics. So in order to find out more information, you can go to our website, which is keyphonics.org, and you can click on the free trials and pricing. If you do have other questions, if you go to our website, you can go to contact us, and you will see that it will ask you for just a couple of key pieces of information so you can get further information, additional questions, quotes, things like that. And we hope that you will join us in our I want to say fight, but that's really not the word, but I guess it is, because it's what we do every day. We get up and we really want to fight for kids to be able to read. So please join us in that. And then I'm going to ask Carrie to talk a little bit more about the offerings from CORE.
Yeah, so I am really excited to announce that CORE has partnered with Keyphonics to provide initial training on the assessment system, along with how to read and interpret the reports that come through the Keyphonics system. And then in addition to that, really taking that data and using it to make some decisions about what to teach in Tier 1, what to teach in Tier 2, and to provide some coaching to your teachers. So how can they make their core program more explicit if the skills that have been taught in the program are not being mastered by the majority of the students? So again, just really excited about that partnership. And if you wanted to reach out to CORE to request training or follow-up support, the address is down there on the slide, corelearn.com/keyphonics. And one other piece, if you want to go to the next slide, Michelle, is just wanted to share, CORE is really well known for our elementary reading academy, and we offer it both in a live synchronous version as well as in an asynchronous online version called the Online Elementary Reading Academy. And we have new national cohorts that are starting regularly. I think the next one starts in mid-September. It's a 10-week online course that is completely aligned with the science of reading and teaches teachers how to teach the foundational skills in reading, along with building vocabulary and comprehension. And there's a big focus on using assessment to inform instruction. So again, information is at that link provided below.
Great. Well, thank you, Carrie, Monica, and Michelle for all of this. Super useful and super timely as we all head back to the classroom and start to address these issues and helping our students become strong readers wherever they are right now, helping them get where they need to be by the end of the year. We do have a little bit of time for questions, so we'll go ahead and get to those. Carrie, this came in while you were speaking a while ago now, but when you say a phonics assessment, how is it administered? Is it in class while other students are present, or one-to-one in a private setting?
Ideally, you would want to select an assessment that is administered one-on-one in a private setting so that you'll be able to get a good handle on an individual student's skill level.
Great. And Michelle, there was a little bit of confusion when you were talking on slide 18 about how the data was showing growth in phonics, but 80% of students were not showing as competent. Can you clear that one up?
Oh, so the 80% actually, yeah, so 80% represented. So the question for that is, are students demonstrating basic competency for phonics skills they have been taught? And looking at that data set, 80% were still struggling. They were under the strategic and intensive. So I apologize, but so the answer to that question would be no. Are students demonstrating basic competency? No, they're not. And so that's really problematic. And then looking at which phonics skills should be taught whole class versus small group, because so many students are struggling, you would recommend teaching those foundational skills to the whole class, and then also looking at those kids that are red, that are most intensive, and looking at those kids for supporting them in addition, because they are struggling the most.
Great. I'm just going to interject here because we have several questions coming in, and the answer is yes. You will get a copy of the slide deck and the recording, and we'll also include the link for you to access the Keyphonics free trial. So all of that will be coming to you tomorrow. So let's see, Monica, what are your thoughts around older students helping younger students in small groups, and that being a way to help build skills for both sets of students?
I think that when you're talking about intensifying instruction and targeting a really critical skill, like the ones that we have identified, there is no substitute for a highly skilled and qualified teacher. And so students, things like buddy reading can be incredibly wonderful opportunities to reinforce skills, can be great for practice, can be great for socializing how important it is to read, and how fun reading can be and how enjoyable reading can be. But I think when you're talking about students who, again, are showing risk around these high priority skills, you want to get them with the highest skilled teacher possible. And so again, as you're thinking about your whole group, small group instruction, buddy reading and things of that nature, activities like that can be wonderful way that students can be engaged in something while you're maybe working with a smaller group of students. And so I've seen it used that way really effectively.
All right. And I'm going to squeeze just one more question in, even though we're at the top of the hour. But given the skills gaps that we're likely to be seeing this year, how frequently do you recommend progress monitoring to just see how things are moving along as you're doing this instruction?
Who wants to take that?
That's you, for sure.
You know, a lot of it depends on the resources that you have. I mean, typically when you think about monitoring students who are receiving strategic support, The rough rule of thumb is to monitor every 2 weeks, right? So you need to look at your assessment results, look at the students' level of support needed, and kind of, you know, base your progress monitoring frequency on that level of support. So strategic about every other week. Students who have intensive support needs would be more like weekly. But I'll let Monica and Michelle add to that.
The one thing I was going to say is when I think of progress monitoring, I do think about it the same way Carrie just described, are those kids that are receiving more intensive, like a tier 2 or tier 3, which we will be talking about in future webinars. But I think it's important right now to get good data at least 3 times a year on everyone on these critical skills. Even if the data is not friendly, meaning that it's showing we have a lot of work to do, it's really important to capture that at least 3 times a year so that we can look at those things like Monica was talking about at a system level. Like, are we functioning well as a system? Are we moving kids along? And if you don't have the data, you won't know how to change what teachers are doing every day. And honestly, it's not about what we're testing, it's about what teachers are teaching. And the more time we can get teachers teaching those critical skills, the better off the kids are going to be. But they have to have the data to show them which skills need to be addressed.
Yeah, completely agree about universal screening 3 times a year. Absolutely.
Great. Well, I am sad to say that we have run out of time together. So thank you again, Monica, Carrie, and Michelle for being here with us and sharing this expertise. As Michelle said, we are going to be hosting actually 2 more webinars coming up, focusing on tier 2 and tier 3 reading instruction. So keep an eye on your inbox and on our website and on our social media channels for information about that date and getting registered for that. And also keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow for an email. Again, you'll be getting a link to the recording, the slide deck, and to all of the resources, the checklists, the past webinars, that webinar series with Anita Archer, lots of good stuff coming your way tomorrow. So just keep an eye out for that. And also your certificate of attendance will be included in that email. So thank you again for joining us. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day, and we appreciate your being here.
Thank you, everyone.